Thank you so much for joining us here today. I want to just get started and ask, both of you have startups that incorporate and are based on AI. How did you make the decision to start with AI? Let's start with you, Maya.
Yeah. I think when working with AI, it's always about first thinking of a use case or knowing of a use case you'd like to solve through technology, and then AI may help or may not help. So in my case, I started working a lot with computer vision, trying to predict, understand human-machine interactions, predict behavior of people from videos, and that's what got me into AI. So I needed AI to do that, because I wanted to build a system that allows any machine to interact with people. And working with AI, I then understood, oh, wow, there's such a huge problem with how we train it and the data, which then got me into my current company, which means building synthetic training data to build better AI models. So it was really around wanting to solve a problem, and then AI was the way to doing it, and then trying to understand AI a bit better, and then seeing the gaps within AI, and with that, building solutions. So AI is it's not secondary, that's wrong, because obviously AI is with everything that I've been working on in the past 10 years, but the reasons for doing it were not, I want to work with AI, it was more, I want to work with a certain purpose, a certain problem, and then AI would help deliver.
And what about you?
At Authentify, we decided to tokenize the physical world around us. So we said, how much information exists about physical things? And since we're digitizing physical things for sporting goods, provenance and counterfeit information was very important, meaning that there's a lot of data out there for us to process to make sense of, is this bag really this bag? Is this ball really Messi's ball? So in order to do that, it made a ton of sense to look at algorithms and models, and we incorporated the understanding that there's a lot of AI out there that we needed to take advantage in order to build our service.
So it sounds like in both cases is a little bit of starting with the problem and then going from there, which is really important in this conversation of thinking about whether something is hype or whether something is reality. So let's go to that. AI has changed so much in how we talk about AI in the past couple of years. So how has the definition of AI evolved? And what are the genuine capabilities that the both of you see in your work that can help us understand hype versus reality?
I can
Let's start with you again, Maya.
I can have a go at this. Well, I mean, if we think of the AI definitions, right, it's about building intelligent machines, whatever that means, right? I mean, that's also out in the open, right? And what is an intelligent machine? But really, what I've seen over the years is that AI moved from being a very use case or industry vertical specific. So we've seen many AI hypes over the years. Autonomous vehicles, just to name one of these, right? Retail and many others. And now, since 2022, AI has an interface, since LLMs actually started, ChatGPT started, so we can all interact with AI, which has opened up so many possibilities. And that's really what also creates this new hype, right? We can all interact with it, we're all experimenting with it, it's all accessible to us. But AI really has obviously been around for so long, and it's being used so much in very focused areas. And I'm always fascinated about AI models that are working for a purpose, right? How can it help logistics? How it can make medical imaging? How it can make Earth observation better and more efficient? So I think that's really important when looking at AI. But of course, AI has been out in the last couple of years. It's intriguing and exciting, but it's really about how it can be applied.
I think the point that you made about the interface, making AI a lot more accessible, is a really interesting one. And that also maybe is expanding who's able to use AI as well, and also creating these new opportunities for maybe overplaying some of what it can do. Does that sound right?
I think that's definitely true. It required, if we look at the last couple of years, looking at AI started in 2022. I mean, in some ways it has, because this interface actually has made AI accessible for all of us, right? We can all generate images, we can all consult GPT and other tools, and we can all play with it. And with that, of course, with experiments comes hype as well, because you can test something, create a prototype of something that is very exciting, but it doesn't mean that it's actually a tool or a problem or a product that actually works. And then, of course, as entrepreneurs, as innovators, you sell a vision as well. And with that hype and overstating comes almost like as a byproduct. And that's, as the public, as consumers of AI, we really need to be able to peel back and understand what we see, what is being sold to us, to see, okay, what is actually in there. I think that's a skill that needs to be developed by the general public, since we're, well, all interacting with AI.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and I want to ask Bianca about this as well. It is very important for the public to be able to distinguish between hype and between reality, but as a startup founder and as someone that is in the space, how do you think about stating what is possible without crossing the line into hype?
I think we're all making a really big mistake around AI. Like, I think you all can count the word buzz bingo. How many times have you guys, over 10 times, who has here heard the word AI in this conference, maybe today? So I think my first problem with the change is that it's good. Change is good. People know what it is. You're all using the words. But often with that comes misconceptions. And a lot of the stuff out there is not actually AI. A lot of this stuff is just basic regression modeling. A lot of the data out there is not really transformative and innovative. And a lot of the services that are being built have really major ethical and proprietary concerns. And then I raise another question. Does the consumer really need to know? So you raised a bunch of points around, now we all know what it is. We all feel like we know because we use ChatGPT, because we create videos, because we made our funny faces. But the really important part about what this industry or the people in here or you need to know is how is it impacting your industry? What is being generated of value? Are we recycling things that are just there? Are we creating anything that is tangibly changing society? Is what I get excited about what's changed in AI. A lot of the change is also capital. So when you ask me what's changed, is not only people knowing what it is the capital that went in the industry that now allows actual scientists to look at this beyond the buzzword bingo and say, how are we going to treat the data? What is the custodianship? So the other transformation that has happened in the industry, in my opinion, is the understanding of guardianships and rights when it comes to data. And that in itself is a huge issue running in parallel and almost subdue when it comes to legislation and AI. So I think it's very exciting to see humans, benefiting, gimmicking. But a lot of us know it because we're just using to, chat GBT out our LinkedIn posts because it's convenient. And my question then becomes around the transformation of creativity. My question back to you is, what has transformed human creativity when it comes to AI, and how are we looking at that in a hype stage?
I have one comment on this. I think the hype part around everyone knowing or interested in AI is really important to create this even playing field, because that was not there.
Curiosity.
Before. Curiosity, sure, but also just to have the interest and to be able to have a conversation with the society, because there's many open questions around legislation, around regulation, about how do you create ethical and transparent AI. And then the other thing, but many solutions not being AI, I would almost argue differently. I would say AI is in so many things, because you peel AI back. One definition that is incredibly boring but great is a New York City AI action plan, saying AI is an umbrella term of classifications, predictions, statistics, blah, 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 and so many things, meaning it essentially you get data in, something comes out. And then if you start saying, okay, well then AI, my automated text system, that's AI. My Netflix recommendation, that's AI. And so many things. And with that, it becomes, in a way, less exciting, more real. And then back to your point, do we actually have to know? I mean, in the end, I think the AI future will probably be almost very boring, because it will be in every tool. And it's essentially algorithms that are in every tool and everything we consume. But we need to get to the point where we generate and create this trust that we know whatever is embedded supports and assists us. I think that's the big question that we're having now.
So I really appreciate that you brought up the question of, do we need to know? Because this seems so essential. And so Bianca, I just want to clarify, do you think that startups shouldn't have to tell consumers that they're using AI? Is that the point that you were making?
No, that's not the point that I'm making. I think I'm making a point of, so should startups, I guess your question is, should startups tell people.
Yeah, absolutely. And
If they're using.
how does that play into the hype, or how does that maybe get rid of the hype? But the first question, should startups have to tell their users or consumers that they are using AI?
I think startups should have to tell people how they're using people's information and data. And that is in a slew of algorithms and technologies that is beyond data processing or modeling, which is a lot of this predictivity on when we talk and encompass AI into everything. I think that goes with transparency. It's a really hard task, though. So if I'm sitting there as a startup owner or as an investor, it's really difficult because the industry at its core, which is the point I was trying to make before, it's very confusing. At the base of your argument is data. And, you know, data, garbage in, garbage out, data ownership. A lot of people say, we have lots of data, and we leverage your data. A lot of companies have data swamps, like Manguezal. It's not a clean lake, it's not pretty, it's messy. So when you're gonna go tell your consumer, if you're gonna capture, track, or use their data in the future, my question and my answer, just like my role at UNESCO, is absolutely. That's called ethics. Ethics is telling people what you do with what inherently doesn't belong to you. And if what or who is doing it is your algorithm, maybe declaring that is a very important thing. I think startups get caught in the excitement of saying, I'm AI. Just like it was exciting to say, I have APIs and I'm an open insert here, insurance, fintech, right? There's the flavor of the month. Everything inherently is data, people, and rights. So my answer is, for sure, if your startup is looking at data and at leveraging data models, be ready to tell people how. And if you think that that's AI and you have an AI practice, look at hiring somebody who talks about ethics, that answers the boundaries of the use of people's data.
As an investigative journalist, I love that we're talking about ethics, so thank you for that.
Of course.
Just to kind of summarize this a little bit, it really sounds like what both of you are saying is that we just need to be a lot more precise about the language, and when we're talking about something
Correct.
as artificial intelligence, and when we're talking about data or other things that are a little bit less sexy.
Yeah.
I think for one thing, sorry, in terms of be precise, 100%. The other thing is actually, because you mentioned data, how we use data, how we can trust that the data that we provide is being used, but it also alternative ways of generating and finding data. I think it's also a really important one, because I don't probably have seen it in the news about that. I mean, almost like the data required to train all those models that are becoming more strong and stronger, like the LLMs, for instance. We actually don't have enough data for that, right? So we do need to generate data, and looking at ways for people to be able to trust the analytic systems, not to say AI systems, that they're used with the data, to know that their personal data is not used, and to also trust that enough data exists so that the models can actually perform. It's a big challenge. And it's almost like it's often seen as a secondary challenge, but that's what powers everything and what will power the implementation and the trust. So are we using real data? Are we using anonymized data? Are we using synthetic data? It will be a combination of those. But those are the conversations that we are starting to have, finally. But then ultimately we'll applicate how we use AI or how we use analytics.
I want to change tracks just a little bit, because we are here in this conversation, in this track at Web Summit about startups. And so we're talking about how important it is to be precise about whether we call something artificial intelligence or not. But at the same time, we're in this moment when people want to invest in artificial intelligence. So as someone that is thinking about starting a business, starting something in the AI space or a adjacent space, what advice do you both have to navigate that?
Yeah.
I think you brought it up in the beginning of our conversation. Often when you're starting up a company, you're trying to solve a problem or you're passionate about a vision. Technologies is like this fairy dust I fell in love with in the beginning of my career, of saying there's lots of types of technology you can use to fix a problem. So sure, you should be sitting around and looking and saying, maybe you don't need to build the next AI. At Authentify, we leverage other models. We say, what are we going to service a client with, and what kind of algorithms out there can I use to provide my service? So as a startup, I want you to think about AI as this, the buzzword that a lot of other investors have already invested in solutions. So how do you leverage that? How do you make sense of that mess? There's a really interesting space in that gap of saying and if you're maybe not have too many data scientists in your team, it's a good reflection to say how you can actually leverage things you don't need to code and still provide end user services. If we all think about it, the reason why the buzzword bingo is around is because a lot of shareholders are asking the big guys on the top, what are you doing with AI? They don't even know it themselves. So if a startup can have the humility of saying, I'm trying to solve this thing, and I understand there's a lot of money, a lot of investment, and a lot of infrastructure that will allow processing power to take advantage of all this data, then I'd say that makes sense. Or at least that's the philosophy I practice.
I fully agree with you. I think absolutely the use case comes first, but then also in looking at, we have this value chain of AI, and the gaps are relatively obvious, I would say, right? On one hand, there's the application layers, still finding a way of making those models that are out there really useful for us on the long term. I think that's still a very unsolved. There's many companies or companies out there that use to try to create value from things that have been coded already, but what is actually this killer use case is a big question, I think. And the other thing is the value chain. So processing, right? Big problem. Data, data, incredibly big problem. How do you verify? How you train it? How do you create it? So essentially looking at the AI value chain and looking at those gaps there and seeing how can your expertise help bridge this gap. I think those are things that are really exciting now. And of course the use case, yeah.
And if I may, on that, there's two areas that are really, really cool that I can nerd out about. If you're a startup and you're looking, because we're startup stage, and you're looking for a few areas, the property ownership area is one that, I'm a digital identity expert, and I love identifying things and people. And that space has a huge amount of opportunity. If you just kind of think about who owns the things that then were inputted by you, just think of ChatGPT. What's the ownership of all the things we've inputted in there? What are all the services? So who gets to have attribution, the rights to do something about it? There's an entire problem space around the explosion of all of this that is really huge. And then there's another space around what are we going to do with the privacy and the biases that exist. A lot of the algorithms being built are because we don't have enough diversity in the room. We don't have enough people with opinions because the buzzwords, when they pass, they get complicated. And the thing I want to leave startups with as well is that we need other people. We need other industries. If your heart beats, you have agency. You have the right. You have something to say about this. Because a lot of these things are going to run up to social and human implementation and access problems. So the problem space is not just technical and theoretical, but it's actually quite interesting.
And there's maybe a third one to add is the sustainability of models, actually, and something I'm very excited about, because you're absolutely right. Data, bias, how do you actually create a model that is diverse enough and that actually can do what it says it can do? And then, secondary, how do you create a model that actually doesn't really harm the environment? How can you create a model that is maybe not a huge deep learning model, but smaller, that has a smaller footprint, and with that performs better? And all of those things start getting hand in hand. Smaller models, better data sets, better privacy, reduced bias, and reduced carbon footprint. So thinking about those parts now really helps to see how AI can actually be embedded in the real world, because ultimately you don't want massive models creating massive impact on a carbon footprint with what we have out there today. So I think those are the things startups, I think, should be looking at.
And if the VCs don't ask you about the carbon footprint, they'll ask you about cost. So the other thing, too, that is interesting to know is, when you get down to the actual practicality of this, as a startup doing it right now, the cost of it is prohibiting.
Yeah.
The game is actually a game of infrastructure. A lot of the machines to process some of this data, you need to get on a special order to even order. The people in here that maybe manage this stuff know. So there's a thing around unit costs and being able to really deploy. So when I hear, a pitch at a startup pitch competition talking about, I'm going to solve the world hunger through AI, and I'm going to do these other things. Just the cost of processing the data to deliver the food is prohibiting. So we need to, there's a lot of work. So in that, there's opportunity.
I love that we just got some great ideas for AI startups.
That's what we're supposed to do, right? Give you value, maybe?
But speaking of what AI can do, what are some of the lesser known applications of artificial intelligence that are already making a difference and an impact in our daily lives?
I can have a go. Originally coming from the kind of infrastructure, automotive, urban world, I do think there's powering the supply chain. I mean, AI or essentially anything with data analytics, right? And machine learning has been powering and making the supply chain so much more efficient for such a long time. It's just embedded in something we don't really see, but it's kind of enabling, right? Safety, automotive safety, pedestrian safety, I think. So that absolutely, AI has been in there so long. Food production, right? Little robots moving around production parts, producing food, and other things. It's been for decades, actually. AI being built in there, and we take it for granted. We often don't know about it. But I think those are the examples that, yeah, lesser known maybe, but definitely out there.
I think most hedge fund managers would tell you that they've been running quantum computing that runs your cash for a long time. And most people don't really reflect on that being a known thing. But one of the ones that surprised me the most is recently electricity. So I'm super lucky to be Brazilian, but I live in Denmark, and we have a lot of rain, and it's really crappy and dark there. And we're a very digitized country. They've actually put identities on all the pipes and all the measuring things. And for 5 years, the country has been running on what they call one of the most innovative data models and machine learning on energy in the planet, because they're a tiny island and they can do it and they have the resources. So on a day-to-day basis for me, I take for granted that the electricity runs on optimized AI. As a citizen of Denmark, I get a text message saying I should do my laundry because it's cheaper to do my laundry at a particular time. So, and this has been happening for 4 years, and it's something that is very well known in a lot of countries and something we take for granted.
So infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Awesome. And then we can't have a conversation about the hypes of AI without also talking about some of the doomerism and the potential for AGI, artificial intelligence's sentience, all of this. So I want to ask, what do the both of you think are the most, or is the most dangerous thing about AI currently?
I think that the term or this idea of AGIs in general is almost hiding the fact that we need to think about models that can assist us and make us more productive. And I think this whole conversation of AGI is almost kind of deceiving in a way, right? Because it's sci-fi. It is sci-fi, right? And there's a big question whether we should work towards this or not. I believe that AI should always be assistive. AI should always be focused on use cases, small models, etc., what we have been discussing before, sustainability reasons, etc., and be assistive rather than have one big model, right? And we're very far away from that. But of course, in the hype and in the conversation, in the media, people like to talk about it, which is fair and fine, but it's almost very often deceiving, I think. I think we should really talk about specific problems. How can we use data to solve those? And that's all AI, but it's then much more focused.
I think I already brought up one of the topics I think doesn't get enough attention because it's not sexy. Talking about ethics isn't sexy, usually. It's not a privacy conversation, it's a compliance conversation. I think that's clearly like the role of AI legislation and geopolitics in AI legislation is one, to be aware. It goes back to this ownership and this right of countries like mine to write their own story and stop being in the behind the scenes. We did it with PICs. Why couldn't Brazil do it with AI? A lot of this is much deeper than do we have the engineers? Are the engineers properly funded and incentivized? I think a lot of the business around AI and really, if you look around, guys, like a lot of the technology companies are maturing a sense of saturation of control. If you look at the AI conversation around, Apple's not going to be able to play on some algorithms conversations anymore because Apple's in your pocket and in your house. So that's a game of boundaries and geopolitics that we often go very star-eye, bushy-eye, fairy tale, the world's beautiful, AI is going to change the world. The second one I would say is I think we're still asking a lot of the wrong questions, personally. If we talk about the debate around is AI still driven by fear in the media, fear drives a buzzword and a lot of misnomers. Fear lets us be led by somebody that just sounds like they have it together. And the last time we did that, we ended up in the technology duopoly and world we live in today. So when I say the question is wrong, why are we asking if AI is going to replace human beings? Why aren't we pondering, were we meant to do this in the first place? Were we meant to work in the way we are? Were we meant to optimize the world in the way we are optimizing? A lot of these things can solve these bigger problems, and I think there's not enough attention in that conversation.
Fully agree.
Those are great answers, and I think it leaves a lot for everyone to think about. Thank you both so much for this conversation.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.